Even though you might not know it, every day you probably use a euphemism and someone probably says a euphemism to you. Euphemisms is when someone uses language that is in a more polite tone, or like phrases or sayings that are less harsh to cover up like harsher language and direct language. Today I will be talking about my favorite euphemism, why people prefer euphemisms when speaking in or communicating, and then how euphemisms can be a barrier in language when it comes to cultures. So first, my favorite euphemism is friends with benefits, because it's like a pleasant way of explaining that you're sleeping with someone, but you aren't in a relationship with them. I think it's a fun euphemism that has been created by my generation. That's one of the reasons I like it. It's because I think like my personal, like the generation that I'm in, uses it a lot more. And it helps explain that you do not always need romantic feelings to desire something. And I also like it because it kind of takes away the stigma around casual sex and hookups, and it's an easier way of saying that you have no feelings for someone. So then, why do we prefer euphemisms? Why don't we just prefer direct language? It makes sense in our society that society enjoys euphemisms over direct language, because the words we choose to communicate with determine a lot of the time how we are perceived. Although in life it is impossible to always speak positively, euphemisms can disguise the unpleasant words that we are needing to say. This in turn does not change a perception of a person. A good example of this is when an employer tells their employee that they are let go, instead of just saying that they've been fired. This type of language is used in a heavy conversation like this because it takes some of the burden off the employer delivering the bad news and puts it on the company instead. In this case, the employee would blame the company itself instead of the employer, which in turn would lead to the perception of the employer has not been changed in this instance. Also, in this case, the employee or the receiver of the euphemism would be spared some hurt feelings, in this case not a lot, but still some, that would arise if they were told they were fired. Our society is filled with euphemisms that spare other people's feelings and reduce harshness. Another example is when companies use the term plus size instead of just saying larger sizes. You see instances like this a lot in marketing because companies don't want to offend their shoppers. I think that a lot of people prefer this language, however, because it creates an opportunity to speak and be spoken to in gentler terms. So cultural barriers that occur in euphemisms. Obviously, as you can imagine, some cultures do not speak in the same tone or communicate with the same type of language as our culture does or other cultures do. So when it comes to euphemisms, cultures can get confused with other cultures and what they say. In some cultures, it is polite to be direct and not cover up your words with euphemisms. And then in other cultures, it is super inappropriate to talk about there's a lot of taboo terms that exist in their culture, and it is inappropriate to talk about them in public or even with your friends or family. I also think that it is a generational thing. Imagine saying friends with benefits to your grandma or your grandparents. They might understand the meaning behind it if they think about it a little bit, but they'd have to think about it a little bit. They wouldn't just understand it like my generation would. So I think, especially with the internet now, there is a lot of sayings that my generation would understand, but older generations would not, and there are a lot of sayings that older generations use that younger generations don't use. So when it comes to euphemisms that are slang, the different generations aren't going to understand. So that is my take on euphemisms. What you guys got to know what my favorite one was, and why people prefer euphemisms, and the cultural barriers that occur with euphemisms.